I grew up in the area called Pisgah, down in the Shermansdale area, and grew up in a farm. What else? I went to a one-room schoolhouse, and I started to school at 4. Not that my mother had died very young. My parents lived in Carlisle, and he moved over to Perry County, and he took my 2 older siblings to school, and he said to the teacher, "I don't know what I'm going to do with this little one." And she said, "Send her to school." And we had a big pot-belly stove in the corner of the schoolroom, and she made a bed there for me to sleep in, and I had my own little desk with coloring books, and they were days that our generation could never understand. The generation of today could never understand.
I grew up until I was 11 years old at Ickersburg, and I went to what was the old Irvin School. It's still up there not too far from Seville. It is now a home. Mr. Stewart lives there, and he just passed away, and his widow is living there. And I didn't start the school till I was 8 years old, and that's quite a long story. But in 3 years, I was in 5th grade, and then we moved to New Bloomfield, and continued to another one-room school. Frank Fry was my teacher. We eventually moved to a small farm. We had 3 cows, and so it was my job to milk 3 cows, and we farmed probably 30 acres of crops, which I did, and eventually we built 2 chicken houses and had, I believe it was 4,000 chickens, and part of my job was to wash and weigh eggs and crate them. And then I got jobs when I was 12 years old, and as Barbara says, even our own children could never fathom that world that we grew up in, ever. We had no phone, no electric, and I tell my friends, I was really a poor kid. I didn't even own a cell phone back then. I worked all kind of jobs besides the farm, and got 25 cents an hour, and usually all I could eat from some of the neighbors. It was farm work. And then when I got a little older in high school, I got 4, 5, 6 lawn jobs around town, so I mowed lawns. And then eventually I got a job on the sawmill. I was still in high school in the summertime, of course, for Dow Fusselman, and I got like $1 an hour, I believe. I thought I was like Mr. Trump. I was loaded, you know, and worked 10 hours a day and run a 2-man chainsaw. Now, most people don't know what that is, but the one end of that chainsaw weighs, in my estimation today, somewhere around a ton, so quite heavy. And so we would work an hour on the heavy end and then an hour on the light end, and at the end of 10 hours, I would ride my bike to in the area of the Little Buffalo State Park from Gloucester Hollow to Little Buffalo, and then work 10 hours and then ride home. Eat and go straight to bed. I was so tired. It was interesting. It kept me out of trouble, though.
After Mother passed away, my father had 3. I was 3. My sister was 5, and my brother was 7. And the pastor from the church that they attended in Carlisle went to him and said, "I had 3 families. Will take your children." And he said, "No." He said, "My children are going to be raised together." So he came to Perry County, bought a farm in Perry County, so that I grew up on a farm and where we milked cows by hand, and we had a big chicken house, which I hated chickens. Had a rooster flog me one day, and my father had eventually remarried So after my stepmother took care of my wounds, we had chicken corn soup.
And animal abuse, they call it.
We did something interesting that I remember as a child. My father had I would say it was probably a 6x6 area that he dug up and put straw in the bottom of it, and then he put fruits over it. Apples, pears, and so forth. And then he put straw over that. And during the winter months, we had fresh fruits from off the farm. That doesn't occur, I don't think, today. Of course, I haven't been on a farm since I met him. He took me off the farm. Praise the Lord.
We knew every neighbor of ours. We neighbored with them. Mm-hmm. We walked to visit them because a lot of the times we didn't have a vehicle. I remember one of our Model A Fords was taken back because we didn't have our monthly payment because my stepfather couldn't work. He couldn't find jobs. I remember of this big man coming in one dark night to the house, and he had an overcoat on, and he kept his hands in his pocket like he had a gun. He was after the car, and he asked for the keys, and of course, you were pretty sure that he might have had a gun. I don't know. But he got the car, so we didn't have a car. I remember finally getting a bicycle and riding to the Seville store and getting a loaf of bread. And I remember of our neighbors kind of belittling people that didn't bake their own bread because they were too good to bake bread, too lazy, too whatever. And I think bread was maybe 6 or 7, maybe 8 cents a loaf. So we would maybe get one loaf a month, maybe. My mother would bake, and but we, for a while, were on welfare. I will never forget that. And then my family drew like $680, I believe, from welfare over a period of maybe a year or two, something like that. And then when things got better during the Second World War, that had to be paid back. Well, I tell people that today. I don't think they believe me. I remember of driving from Ickersburg, going from Ickersburg to Blaine, I believe monthly, to get a little bag of potatoes, a bag of rice, a little bag of dried beans, I think maybe a pound of butter. People were starving, absolutely starving. There was no work. We are so spoiled today. It is pathetic. It is unbelievable. People got married in those days. And we had an aunt and an uncle that decided, we had an uncle that decided to live with this lady. She was a superb person, but they never married. And they were looked down upon by the family like they were pariahs. And they stayed together forever and had five children, and the children all turned out to be great, but they never married, ever married. But in those days, people married.
Well, I was just going to say, and where I grew up, neighbors took care of each other. One family in particular had scarlet fever.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they were quarantined. And the neighborhood just took food and put it at their door, and now you don't even know who your neighbor is.
They milk cows.
We milked cows, did their milking, and just did all kinds of things. When I had our first child, I knew nothing about raising a child. And we had a dear older lady that lived down the road from us, she was up there every day teaching me and showing me things to do. And our oldest child was kind of fussy. And I think he was fussy because I was so nervous because I didn't have a clue what to do as a child. And people don't neighbor today.
And she happened to be the wife of Dr. Morrow. You want history. Dr. Morrow was the father of Bill Morrow, who was our attorney here in New Bloomfield, who passed not too many years ago. And we neighbored with the Morrows because they were housebound. So Barbara and I would go down and sit with them and just visit. And they were some of the best times of our life, actually. But Mrs. Morrow was a gem. She was like a grandma.
Yeah, Grandma Morrow.
us.
She came up all the time to help with our oldest son.
She lived probably 75 yards from our house, very near to Carnes. And she would come up the road, and I can envision her today, and she'd have her checkerboard under her arm. And she and Barbara would play checkers. I was too busy eventually got into the insurance business and was quite busy in those days. But Barbara became quite a checker player, and to this day I suspect she could clean up most people that are
Well, I
involved
haven't
with
played checkers probably since Grandma Morrow died.
Those were the good old days.